My name is Dominique Gendre, and I live in London, in Tufnell Park, North London. I lived in Paris for about 8 years, trained as a classical guitarist, and trained also under a number of different teachers in harmony, music analysis, piano, solfège. I played saxophone briefly for a while, wrote music for friends who were filmmakers and for experimental films. It was a very lively time. There was actually a very vibrant jazz scene and world music scene at that time. In fact, a lot of my friends and colleagues all got involved in the whole world music scene, playing with big artists like Salif Keita, Baba Mal, Youssou. I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago and spent a lot of my childhood and adolescence between Trinidad and Martinique, which is one of the French Caribbean islands. When you think about it now, it's sort of idyllic. Trinidad is an island. It's not a tourist economy-based island. It's heavily industrial because we have oil and natural gas and pitch. The island itself is very beautiful because it's geographically a bit of South America that broke off many thousands of years ago. So we have a number of tropical rainforests in the island. It's almost as if the culture of Trinidad, because of its mix, which is so rich, we have the Americas, the indigenous people of the islands and the Americas, Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, all mixed in Trinidad with all of their cultures, all of their cuisines, all of their languages. So that makes for a really, really rich society and culture where people actually participate in each other's culture and traditions and rituals very easily. Of course, there's the influence of all the live music that you hear constantly in Trinidad. Steel band was such a huge presence. So throughout the year, you hear steel bands playing. You also hear drums playing a lot. And that usually comes from the villages that were around where we live. A lot of my appreciation of music is completely influenced by the carnival culture that I grew up with in Trinidad, where it's about mass participation. It's about music and performance happening in places where you least expect it to. It's about music as a ritual. It's about music also as a cathartic experience that embraces as many people as possible. And once we go through the exercise or the performance or whatever it is, you come out on the other side almost a renewed person or a different person. I often have to think of this space in which I'm going to be creating this experience, what the space looks like, sounds like, how people will be comfortable sitting and responding to the music. Where is the action actually taking place? Where is the sound coming from? Do I want my performers to be on a stage or at the same level as the audience? Do I want them to be moving? So there are all sorts of little considerations that are going on at the same time, depending on what I've written. And depending on this space, you will get, the audience, the listener will get the sound as I intended it to be heard. And in a way, again, this is where I realize that I'm always trying to recreate that impact, that initial impact of the opening of Carnival, which is almost like a dawn breaking. And one is suddenly overwhelmed by the arrival of sound. The space in which you create that sound is really important to that. Well, the actual content, the actual material that I write would be very different if I'm writing for film and video, for example, and if it's a non-fiction piece, even a documentary. The music has to express something very different to the image. So it's about finding the space where the music fits, and finding exactly what sort of frequencies and applying those frequencies to the instrumental family and thinking, well, what instrument will come across here? What instrument will have the best impact? For a live performance setting, I am free to express myself artistically if you want. So if I decide I want to write a suite of dances in 4 movements, while I'm thinking about the drama or the trajectory of the actual music, it's actually more about all of the drama, all of the image being contained within that music. So that music has to draw a picture. And that's the essential difference. Or what I tend to focus on, obviously, is the image and the sound of the voices, the textures of the voices, and how the music itself is going to sound against those voices, and what that music will come across as. You know, it can't intrude, but at the same time, it can't be invisible. So you want it to say something without that something suddenly appearing shocking or out of place. You have to find a harmonious existence for the music, and that's really what I'm listening out for. I actually started off writing music for film, for experimental films, and then slightly later for live theatre. So again, incidental music. And then I did a lot of radio drama. So this is all writing music purely for audio, but dramatic audio. So the music exists on a different sound level than in a film, because you don't have the visuals and everything is being created by sound. And then when I went back to film, it was suddenly, a very different experience. And now I mostly write for live music experiences. Well, there are a number of factors that become important in a studio. First of all, there's the music, and finding the good balance, the perfect balance of sound, so that the important elements within the music, the most important motifs, are heard clearly. That we reproduce the sound as naturally as possible, and that you get the full spectrum of each instrument's color. On each instrument, we hear a sense of that color's, that instrument's richness, and that's what a mixing session is important for being able to bring out and enhance all those different textures and colors. It's interesting because very often I'll start off with an idea, and the idea will take its own sort of shape and erect its own architecture. And the architecture is important in the sense that it gives me a form, it gives me a skeleton to hang everything else on. But as I progress, what I'll find is that it's important to also move away from the dressing of the structure, to let the piece speak for itself. A perfect sound is a sound where the trajectory of the piece is clear. The instruments that have a leading role are heard. The color and the palette of the rest of the ensemble is very clear, is very distinct, and the overall musical journey becomes clear, and that's very, very difficult to achieve. The perfect sound should sound as natural as possible. And for example, when I talk about the piece sitting comfortably with the orchestra, what I mean by that is that it should sound as if this piece is the most natural piece for them. So very often, for example, there are works that we are all familiar with from the classical repertoire, and if you hear any orchestra playing them, the sound is natural, and we think of it as natural because they've played it so often, it's so familiar to them that it pours out of them like their own breath. And that is, for me, perfection. That's the sort of situation that I'm always trying to achieve with a new work of mine. It's often that's the difficulty of creating a new work.